channel. So with the winter sports season fast approaching, we figured we'd do our next video series on injury management. So just going through some basic stuff. So the first of these videos is going to be on what we call R.I.C.E, which is basically the basic principles of what we want to do with an injury. Our next video will probably be looking at going over something we call harm, which is basically what not to do. So moving on with R.I.C.E. So as with most things in medicine, things get quite hard to remember, so we end up using mnemonics for a lot of stuff, basically acronyms. So R.I.C.E, R-I-C-E. Price, if we're being a bit particular about it. We'll talk about the P later on. Our first point is the R, which is rest. Now this one's pretty self-explanatory. If you've injured an area, we want to let it settle down, not aggravate it, basically give it a bit of a rest. So whether this is after you've rolled an ankle, so not running on it for a little while, or with a back, just kind of chilling out, letting it do its thing for a bit. Now it's also important when we're talking about rest to realise that this is relative rest. What that means is that we want you doing a little bit of stuff, want you moving, want you doing some things, but not things that are really sore. So with a back injury, for instance, generally we want to try and keep people moving as much as we can. We don't want them just lying in bed doing nothing. That's not going to be great for the back. But we also don't want them going and lifting a fridge. Probably not going to help either. So R, rest. Moving on to I, which is ice. Now ice, what we're primarily using ice for is actually pain relief. So a lot of people think it's swelling, and it does help a bit with swelling, especially in the early stages on, but it's really, really, really good for pain relief in these early acute injuries. So when we're icing, we've got a few different ways of doing this. We can use gel packs, which are great, but often they don't stay that cold that long, so you tend to need to refreeze them quite a lot. And they also have the problem in that they do get, when they are cold, they are very cold. So this goes for all the icing that we're going to be doing, but generally you want to be putting down something first, tea towel or t-shirt or something over the area that you want to ice, or if you've got a little cover for them, you can use that. We tend to use ice packs, so we've got nice little ice packs that we have in our kit field bags, but frankly just using a Ziploc bag, popping some ice in that works really well as well. You don't even have to be that fancy. I mean, a frozen bag of peas out of the freezer works just as well as anything else. Now in terms of how long we're icing and things like that, there's a little bit of variability in that. We tend to go by some simple rules, so to start off with, for the first day or so, 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off, and then moving on to like 10 minutes on, 30 minutes off, and then maybe a little bit more time off, moving sort of towards that 48-hour mark. Icing is really important in that first 48 hours. It can help after that, so basically if it feels like it helps, keep going. But that first 48 hours especially, really, really important that we are icing things. There are some exceptions to that. Sometimes backs prefer heat, but otherwise, generally ice overheat in that short acute period. Moving on again, so done R, rest, I, ice, up to C. C is compression. So compression is what's really going to help with the swelling. Now a few different ways of doing compression. Firstly, if someone's injured an area that's already strapped, it's not a bad idea to keep that strapping on, say an ankle for instance. The strapping does provide some pretty decent compression. If it's getting very uncomfortable, then taking it off is a really good idea. If it's been on for quite a while, more than a couple of days, definitely be time to take that off, or if it's starting to aggravate the skin. Otherwise it's not. If it's to put on, say, that day, the day of the injury, it's not a bad idea to keep that on for maybe that night, as long as it's not too tight. But play that one by ear a little bit. Otherwise, with compression, the standard thing that you'll be using are crepe bandages. Okay? Now you'll find these in most medical kits. You buy them from the pharmacy, they cost next to nothing. Really, really useful. So when we're using these, what we want to do is we want to start from generally the furthest point of the injury away from the core. So if we had a thigh sprain, we want to sort of start around by the knee. When you're rolling it out, if you roll it that way, that makes things a lot easier than trying to go that way and kind of faffing around with the roll as you're doing it. So rolling it out along. In terms of tension, generally you want to be able to pretty comfortably fit a finger underneath underneath the bandage. 2 or 3 fingers is probably a little bit loose. If you're really struggling to get anything in there, it's probably a little bit tight. The other really good thing we can use for compression, which is potentially a little bit better than the crate bandage sometimes, is the tubular bandage or tubular grip. Now these are a little bit harder to get hold of. You can get them from the pharmacy and things like that, but they do tend to come in quite long rolls. We've got plenty here in the clinic. We give them out quite regularly. They're really good. They do come in different sizes, so sizing can be a bit of an issue for some people, but it doesn't tend to be too hard to kind of get a rough idea of what we want. With these, do make sure you take them off at night. Okay, it's not going to do anything particularly bad, but it is a constant compression, especially for something like a calf, and it can just be a bit weird waking up in the morning and having a bit of pins and needles and things in your feet. So generally take these off at night, but otherwise they're really good during the day, and they're a lot easier to get on and off than the crate bandage. So our last letter in our acronym, in our R.I.C.E, is elevation. Now, elevation is especially important for any cuts or anything that's bleeding, but basically the whole idea is we want to get whatever area is injured, even if it is just a rolled ankle, swollen ankle, above the heart. Okay, so if we're elevating through here, that's kind of okay. It doesn't need to be miles up above the head, but we just want it to basically have gravity keep things away from it a little bit, like keep the blood away from it a little bit, not completely obviously, but just help a little bit of that swelling. Another time where it's quite important, and we will go over this in a later video, is with using slings. So if it's a shoulder injury, we do what we call a low sling, which is the classic sling that you've sort of seen down here. Whereas a wrist or hand injury, we want that a little bit above the heart, so we use a different sling position and come up more onto the shoulder, just again, so we've got a little bit of elevation there. Of the ones we've talked about at the moment, elevation is probably the one that you can mess around with the most in terms of it's not quite as important as the others, but it does really help, especially with lower limb injuries. Now I mentioned before that we do have a P in this right at the start, turning us from R.I.C.E to price. The P is prevention. Now obviously, if you're not getting injured in the first place, that's ideal. We will talk about some methods of injury prevention during this video series, but just basic things like if you're carrying an injury and you're with a team that has a physio, getting that strapped or coming into clinic and having us strap that for you, that can make a massive difference to re-injury. Being sensible around injuries, if you know you're not right, if your hamstring's not right or something like that, don't play. And also managing the injuries properly. So that does mean, it might mean coming in to see us, it might be coming in to see your physio if you're not one of our patients. And just being sensible around that. It's a lot of injury management is common sense. Let's say it's common sense, it's probably not as common as we'd like, but as long as you're being sensible, if you're looking at something going, I wonder if I should do that, if I do that it'll probably really hurt my ankle, it's probably going to really hurt your ankle if you do that, so it's probably not the best of ideas. So just applying some common sense and looking to prevent these injuries again before they happen. So like I said, our next video will focus on the not to do's. Again, using this acronym called HARM. A little bit less sort of hard cases compared to this one, like the ice rest compression especially, really want those to do with all the injuries. There's some aspects of HARM that are we're a bit stricter on, but generally we want you to focus on what to do. But like I said, we'll talk about that next video. We'll see you there.